All right, and we are live. Welcome to another episode of The Shift, sharing helpful insights in freight technology. I am here with Mr. Brent Suma, the CEO of LoadSmith. Brett, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you for having me, Rahmel.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here. As you guys know, we like to highlight innovations in freight and tech. And Brett here has an amazing innovation, LoadSmith. We're going to talk about that, talk about Brett's background in the industry, talk about LoadSmith, and just hopefully bring some value and some information to the audience. So, Brett, I'd like to start with you just kind of introducing yourself a little bit. Tell us what LoadSmith is and what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me on again, Rahmel. I really appreciate the opportunity to reach your audience. And, from our perspective, LoadSmith is a very forward-thinking freight organization. We are obsessed over network design and why network design can lead to what we believe the transformative nature of transportation and trucking. What we're really talking about is how do we look into the future and what does the future of work look like for the men and women who drive truck for a living? We celebrate them. We love them. We want to be a part of their journey. And so for us, when we look at the business that we're building and the platform that we're building, it really is centered around what is the driver look like now, in the future, and really beyond 2030. What happens to the profession of driving, and how can we continue to foster that and celebrate that? And then from a commercial perspective, how do we serve our customer, and how do we continue to scale with our customers as we build our platform? And again, it is so driver centric because the driver is so vitally important to what we do. But I've been in this industry for a long time, and I've seen a significant amount of evolution over time, mostly related to technology. But there is starting to be an evolution regarding how people want to work and how people do work. And then beyond that, there's a lot of transformative technology coming down the pipeline that really can be the transformation of really quality first and last mile jobs into the future.
Got it. So that's very interesting, kind of high level. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's unpack that. What does the driver look like in 2030 and beyond? Because that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, I think when I first started working on the concept of LoadSmith, we spent a significant amount of time understanding generations, and we did. There's a whole, you know, science out there around generational cohort theory. Really, what that says is that each generation has a specific type of value system. Let's call it. I call it motivations. You could call it value structure, right? And each generation has had a different value system associated with it. So whether you're talking about the silent generation, greatest generation, boomers, generation X, which is what I'm a part of, millennials, and Gen Z, vastly different generations of people, vastly different cohorts. And so we had to look at what is the next generation of worker, what are their value structures, what are their motivations, and then how do we look to the future and understand what is the impact going to be when workers shift and when workers change their value structures and their motivations. What does that have on the effect of work? And then really what is that going to do to our industry? So we took the concept of generational cohort theory and really then applied it to our industry. And what we came away with is that the next generation of drivers, they are willing to drive for a living. Gen Z in particular, as a cohort, is much more willing to go to a trade school and work in the trades, whether that's a plumber or an electrician, or a truck driver. And we feel like we can create the environment in which the next generation can look at it and say, I could be a plumber, I could be an electrician, I could go to college, I could also be a truck driver. And those are interchangeable, really, with the next generation of workers, provided that we build the construct around driving that meets or satisfies their value structures. And so their value structures are very simple. They're less likely to forego work-life balance than previous generations. It doesn't mean that they're not hardworking people. They're just less likely to sacrifice as much as previous generations. Specifically, when you start talking about their mental health, their physical health, being away from their families for prolonged periods of time, missing important events in their lives, having to battle parking, having to battle, traffic, on-time pickup, on-time delivery, erratic sleep schedules, truck stop food, the nutrition aspect of things. And so they're willing, to do the work. However, they're probably not willing to make the same sacrifices that previous generations of drivers have. And so for us, when we look beyond 2030, we looked and say, okay, well, how do we build and create? How do we become the force multiplication of first and last mile jobs that the next generation of driver is A, willing to participate in, but B, how do we do that in a way that is exceedingly lucrative for them? What has bothered me for my 25 almost years in this industry, Rahmel, is that particularly in the larger carrier set, the drivers that are willing to sacrifice the most, let's say, are often rewarded the most from a pay perspective. And the drivers who are willing to, quote unquote, sacrifice the least were often the lowest paid. And you can wrap your mind around that, right? Like you can wrap your mind around and say, well, if a regular route over the road driver that goes out for 6 to 8 weeks at a time, there's a lot of sacrifice there, as opposed to a local driver who shows up at the yard every day, Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. and is off at 3, right? Like we've often said, well, the local driver is not sacrificing as much, so we'll compensate them less, or perhaps supply and demand was out of equilibrium because there's more demand for those jobs and not necessarily, there's a lot high demand but low supply of those jobs. And so we can afford to pay people less for them. We always had a fundamental problem with that because, to be honest with you, doing local driving is very difficult. It requires a tremendous amount of skill, and you're bumping docks multiple times a day. You're navigating narrower traffic generally. You're having to keep your head on a swivel the entirety of the day. Perhaps maybe a little bit more than over the road freeway driving. So I've always felt that there was an imbalance there. And I just believe that when you look at the next generation of worker, you have to create an opportunity for them to make a very good living at this profession. And I think when you look at what happened with the UPS agreement a week ago, 10 days ago, however long ago that was, I read a very interesting article yesterday that there's some people, some software people, software developers, engineers, being very vocally upset that they're going to make less than a UPS driver. And I have to say, driving for UPS is a demanding job, and those men and women that do that job deserve to get paid for it. And so I don't have a problem with that. And in fact, I think that drivers should make more money. And I think that's the general way that things are going in the industry.
Yeah. So how do we create that environment? One, and I mean, what you're saying is definitely a very, very interesting topic. I think there's other things that go into that. I mean, like you said, your local driver, there is some more physical demand, right? Where that kind of, if you look at the physical demand of a local driver and the difficulty of bumping docks, driving in the city and so forth. But then you say another driver is out for more hours, but the level of demand on their body may be less because they're just bumping, they're like dropping, hooking, bumping docks, are not touching freight. It kind of like evens out somewhere, right? Because this guy's out for longer, but they're not doing as much physical work. So the goal for you is what you're saying. You think there should be like some type of equality there, like you kind of weigh it out and there's some type of place where they have to meet, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that, my older brother has been a truck driver for as long as, for 25 years. And he did food service delivery. And if you know about food service delivery, that is a taxing job, right? Yes. And so he did food service delivery for a long period of time. That man sacrificed, right? That's hard on your body. Doing it in Phoenix, Arizona, even in the summer, even at night when most of that job happens, you're still 95 degrees, 90 degrees outside. And you're unloading, 45,000 pounds of food.
That's right.
On a multi-stop schedule, right?
Lift gates and hand trucks and all that stuff.
All of that, right?
Yep.
And he did very well from a profession perspective in that. He recently has moved over to doing more over the road, and not doing food service delivery anymore. But now he's still sacrificing because he's away from home overnights. There's got to be balance, right? We have to be able to have the right job for the right driver, because look, there's always going to be a need for drivers. We're never going to be able to replace the work that the men and women do in this profession. We can supplement, and that's what LoadSmith is working on, is supplementing. But why do we want to supplement? Well, and what do we want to supplement? And so for us, we think that, and when I look into the future and I see, the potential available, the potential of technology from an autonomous truck perspective, I don't see that as a job killer, as much as I see that as the missing piece of technology that's needed to really become the force multiplier of those first and last mile jobs. And the reason being is, again, coming back and looking at what does the next generation of workers tell us, is that they're willing to do the job. They're just not willing to be irregular route, over the road, away from home, non-predictable schedule, all of the things that are difficult to navigate through from a life perspective in the job of professional truck driving. And so by no means are we going to replace truck drivers. If anything, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to take some lanes that are heavily traveled, that are maybe, currently underserved, but and maybe over demanded by customers, because shipping lanes are pretty static in the United States. It's pretty easy to understand where the producer economies are and the consumer economies, or where the manufacturing and the retail take place. So you can look at those and design structure around the network and say, well, these are the lanes that we're going to go after from an autonomous middle mile perspective. And then on either end of that origin and destination pairing, we're going to have significantly scaled first and last mile jobs. And so we believe that as time goes on, and it's funny because I was on Sirius XM Road Dog Trucking like 2 weeks ago. My brother happened to be listening, and it was the first time that I was able to articulate to him, and it was over an interview, that I'm not coming after his job, right? That's like he texted me. He's like, okay, he goes, now I get it, right? Like we're trying to supplement, because we know that there's a group of people out there that are willing to do the work, but they're just not willing to make some of the sacrifices. And we just have the utmost respect for drivers. And again, we're not trying to replace anybody. And in fact, even with talking about autonomous, and it's so funny to talk about our love of drivers and then say we also want to move to autonomous trucking in the same breath, right? It can seem contrarian. However, for us, we know that in order for autonomous to work, that we're going to have a ratio of 4 loads for every 1 autonomous move we make. And what I mean by that is that in order for autonomous to actually work from a unit economic perspective, you have to be overloaded in a particular lane with freight. So for every 1 truck that we move autonomously, we're going to have to move 3 just with my brother or with any other professional driver. We're talking decades before we get to a scale where where we're not at a 4-to-1, where maybe we're at a 2-to-1. But even then, you're still talking about needing, for every 1 load you ship autonomously, 2 loads, which means one of them is going to go non-autonomously. So, so we're not talking about throwing away everything, that all of the work and energy that's been done up to this point. We're just trying to supplement a little bit simply because we see the writing on the wall when it comes to the next generation of workers. And for right or wrong, they have their own viewpoint on work, right? Like just like Gen X has, we have our viewpoints on work, and baby boomers had theirs, and so we can't say right or wrong. All we can say is how do we continue to build a resilient supply chain, and how do we leverage technology, but further than that, how do we leverage the human resource? And what I mean by that is, I had read an article prior to starting LoadSmith, but when I was doing my research on it, and I'm not going to mention who it was from, but because they're a relevant player in the industry, but the concept was that the inefficiencies in trucking could be solved by computer scientists because they're data problems, and the 25 years of experience that I have tells me that if we have a problem in the industry, it's not one to be solved by computer science. It's a human resource problem. It's a human interaction problem. It's an understanding that there's a human being behind the wheel of the truck that has to make thousands of decisions per day about how they operate the truck, what they're doing tomorrow. They have to keep in mind what they did 8 days ago. I mean, you know what I mean? Like think about it. Like I'm fortunate in my job. I don't have to worry about what I did 7 days ago from a work perspective, right? Like I don't have to keep track of that. I can work, I can work 24 hours today without giving any regard to what I did 3, 4, 5 days ago. So we have to remember that there's a human being here, and that those human beings that do this work, that's how they provide for their families. And so it's how they are participating in the economy. And so we can't lose sight of that. And so I don't think that technology is the end all be all savior for trucking. I think that understanding the human element of trucking is way more important. And then talking with people as humans and understanding from them what their motivations are and what they need out of the industry, and then being able to go and build that. And so for LoadSmith, we don't try to solve for every problem that exists, but what we try to do is look at it objectively and say, how can we build the best freight network for drivers? How can we build the most efficiency in that network for drivers? How can we be so obsessed over appointment, pickup and delivery appointments? And why are we so obsessed about that? And understanding that our obsession over something like a delivery appointment, as an example. So we focus a tremendous amount on pickup, length of haul, delivery, right? Like those three things really are the only things that matter from an efficiency perspective. Well, we know that we've got to get the driver on and off our load by 9 a.m. every day, because the opportunity for that individual to get reloaded goes down every hour past 9 a.m. Right? It's like a driver should not take a 4 p.m. delivery appointment, because if you take a 4 p.m. delivery appointment, more than likely you're sitting in the same location tomorrow morning. Right. Mm-hmm. And so those are things that we have to understand in our aspect and in our realm, so that when we're working with carriers and with drivers as an individual, we're providing them the best load, the best opportunity, the best efficiency, the best optimization of their time. And that just goes back to our understanding of how we did that when we were, all working in asset-based operations. One of a funny thing is, in my time, before starting LoadSmith, we'd often have the conversation about who controlled where the trucks were, and ultimately who controls it is the account team, where they book the load to, right? So if you're booking a load from Billings, Montana to Albuquerque, New Mexico, well, you better know that you have a truck in Billings, and you better know that driver wants to go to Albuquerque. I would probably tell you that those two things are probably next to zero chance, right? Like you probably have a zero chance of having a guy in Billings that wants to go to Albuquerque. So then you have to make that move efficient, and it has to be optimized, and it has to work financially. We don't do that at LoadSmith because we know that we're not going to have that scenario. And so we focus in on Dallas to Atlanta, let's say, or Dallas to Kansas City, or Dallas to Memphis. Lanes where we know that drivers want to run, where we know that there's consistency, we know that there's density, and that the driver can run back and forth in between those two places. Again, because if we recognize that the freight that we book is either going to push you further into our network, or it's going to push you out of our network. And if we push you out of our network, we may never see you again. So we always have our work cut out from us from a freight procurement perspective to finding the right freight for carriers. So easy freight, we want our freight to go on and off the truck easily. We want the appointments to work. We want the length of haul to work. It all has to work together. And that's the data part that technology should be solving for us. But the human resource part is, how do we communicate with, how do we partner with the driver or the carrier? And I always talk about the driver, because at the end of the day, the carrier is great, but who I really want to talk to is the guy that, the man or woman who's, doing the work. And so for us, that's our motivation in every load that we book, in every RFP that we go through. It's about, how do we identify the freight that works for carriers and for drivers. And really, so I have a hard time, from a technology perspective, saying that technology is going to solve everything. Technology should just make it easier for us to identify what's good and what's bad. And if it's bad, how do we fix it?
Got it. Okay. Very interesting. So you guys, I just want to clarify the business model real quick, exactly what you guys are doing. So this is like you're procuring specific freight for these drivers that are better opportunities for drivers, and you're procuring it and you're putting it on your board for them to be able to have access to this freight. Is that kind of the model? Am I explaining that right?
Yeah. So Rahmel, our average customer is going to be a customer that an independent or small trucking company is probably not going to be able to tap into.
Okay.
For whatever reason. Okay. So our customers are going to be large Fortune 500 shippers, and those shippers have a lot of gating requirements to get through their procurement. Their when they're onboarding new transportation service providers. And so they have a lot of requirements, whether it be technology requirements, insurance requirements, scale requirements. We have a customer that's saying, if you're not $150 million a year business, you can't do business with us. So they have these gating requirements that keep the smaller providers out. And look, it's because they don't want to have relationships with thousands of people. And right. I understand that. And so when you look at our network, 95% of our freight is contractual, which is very different from most logistics businesses. Not that we don't do some spot freight for customers, that need assistance, but we don't find that we're going to be able to build the network that we want to build without partnering with large shippers that have consistent amounts of freight in the lanes that we're running. And so from an operational footprint perspective, like, we don't have anybody in our business that's just cold calling random customers to book one load, right? Like, our account management structure is, most of our customers are going to be giving us, 50 to 150 loads a week on average. And so that tends to be the sweet spot for us in terms of account management, in terms of freight procurement. And then, to your point, we just continue to build density in those lanes, and then offer them to our carriers in a dedicated scenario to where they're the sole source provider, or they can use our app and our carrier portal to see all of our freight and go in and book it themselves. But we're trying to basically create the LoadSmith freight network should be a very dense and predictable network of freight.
Got it. Now I understand. What have been some of the challenges in building to this point?
Well, I didn't know anything about running a freight brokerage. That was a giant challenge.
Yeah.
There's, not that we don't lack for experience in the industry. but we definitely lacked in experience as a freight brokerage, because it's just not a business that we had ever been in prior. We always had worked on the asset side of a very large trucking company, and so we understand asset utilization. We understand turning your trailers. We understand the whole, PM schedule for trucks, and we understand, the vehicle inspections. And I mean, we know all of the equipment side of things, right? And we know the driver side of things. But we had never brokered a load before. So I think some of the challenges are the first load that we got, we didn't know how to cover it. I mean, that was, we posting our first load to DAT was an experience, right? Like, not anything we had done before. When we very first started, there were a lot of issues that we faced. I mean, we had no credit. We had lots of cash in our checking account, but nobody would haul a load for us because we had no credit history. And so we overcame that by, our CFO, Jessica Kane, was paying carriers out of her personal PayPal account. I didn't expect us to have to do those types of things. We ended up just quick paying every single invoice we got for about 90 days in order to establish a credit score. Insurance has been another one that we've had to work through. When we launched our trailer pool offering, which is again is another thing that we're doing that sets us apart. And we're doing that for the right reasons. We're doing that for the driver. It's counter to think of we're putting trailers into customers, and customers get really excited about us putting trailer pools there. But why we do it is so that we can offer the driver a more efficient experience with us. So they're going able to pick up a preloaded trailer from that customer that they probably couldn't get themselves. That's super clean palletized freight, and then dropping it at the consignee on the other end. That's the efficiency, right? So we're building all those trailers and deploying them. I had no idea that our insurance, that insurance market is new. And so we've had to work through how do we insure our trailers in that market where we're not the primary power source for moving those trailers. So there's been a lot of little hiccups that we've learned along the way. I didn't realize that double brokering was as prevalent in the industry as it was. So we were a little naive to that. Understand why it exists. Don't agree with it, but understand why it exists.
Yeah.
And so, those are things that we've had to navigate through. I would say our lack of experience in the brokerage side of things has not been a hindrance, though, because our experience in the asset side of things has allowed us to probably secure more contracts with customers than maybe we would have had we only had brokerage experience. Meaning
why is that?
Well, because when we go in and talk with customers, we look, act, feel, and talk like an asset.
Talk the language. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk the asset language, if that makes sense. And in fact, whenever I'm on the phone with a customer that's new, I tell them, I'm like, well, you may think of us as a brokerage, but I assure you that after about our third scorecard, you'll look at us as a trucking company. And honestly, that's all I want to be, as a trucking company. And when people say, well, what do you do? I want to run a trucking company.
Got it. Why are these, or why would these larger carrier networks trust you guys as opposed to just, they doing it themselves or going direct to these people? Like, why are you guys able to get this freight and they're not?
Are you talking about large enterprise?
Yeah, the ones that you're targeting.
Yeah. So our large enterprise shippers are, they're smart. And if you really read into the industry much, you can see what's kind of coming in the future. And I think that Hunt, from a large carrier perspective, looks into the future probably better than anybody. And if you're a shipper and you listen to or pay attention to the Hunts of the world when they talk, or if you really read into every single quarter, you continue to read the large trucking companies earnings reports, because most of the large trucking companies are publicly traded. If you read their earnings reports and go back and read them for the last 15 years, and so I'm going to encourage you to go read 60 earnings reports, right? So go back and read 15 years worth of earnings reports from large trucking companies, and what you're going to see is their truck counts have just gone down.
Yeah.
Over that period of time. Their trailer counts have gone the other direction, though.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, their trucking count has gone down, their trailer count has gone up, which in most circles, you would say, oh, trucking companies time out. We have to have a 2.5 to 3.5 trailer to tractor ratio. Well, now all of a sudden, some of these trucking companies are at 5. And so then you go and look a little bit further, maybe like one line down, and it talks about how their brokerage revenue has grown up. They don't call it brokerage, they call it logistics revenue, right? Like their logistics revenue has gone up. And then when you look at the margin expansion of their logistics revenue, their margin expansion is like gone from, let's say that a healthy freight brokerage was no freight brokerage should be at 15% gross margin. Okay. It just shouldn't be. Because if you're actually providing quality service to your customer, you're going to have losses. Okay. Those losses are going to eat into that number. So let's say that a very healthy gross margin number is 10 to 12%. Okay. For a freight brokerage. Then you go and look at these large trucking companies, and their margins are 50% higher than that. They're 18 to 20%. And so you say, well, how does that work, right? And so when you really start looking into it, they've reduced their amount of trucks, they've maintained or grown their trailer count, and then they're just running all of their freight as power only.
Yeah.
Their margin expansion is because they're charging the carrier a little bit less per load, or paying the carrier a little bit less per load to utilize their trailer, which is totally fine. But so if you're a shipper, okay, and you see what's happening in the space, and you see that a trucking company had 4,000 trucks and now they have 3,000, but their trailer count went from 15 to 20, and they're in your office saying, hey, I need you to sign this one little addendum to our agreement that allows me to broker your freight, right? So when I'm in front of the customer talking, they're like, oh, okay, so you're just going to do what Hunt's doing, or what Knight Swift is doing, or what USA Truck's doing.
Right.
And so it's that power only. That's the move, right? Like we're moving to this power only thing. And look, if you really unwound it, if you did take the time to go read those 60s earnings reports, you would see that there was a period of time in there where these trucking companies were hot and heavy to increase their owner operator count, their lease purchase owner operators, right? We know what happened with all of that. They, misclassifications, lawsuits, and everything. So they got rid of that. They said, well, we're not going to do owner operator program anymore. And instead, we'll just sell you our truck. We'll give you insurance. We'll give you a fuel card. We'll give you access to all of our trailers. You just have to get your own MC. Right. Like, and so that's really what they've done. And so that's the general way that things are going. Your mega fleets are getting smaller in truck counts, but larger in trailer counts. I mean, you look at the beginning of this year, Hunt bought 15,000 dry vans from Wabash. It wasn't like they bought 15,000 trucks from Wabash and 5,000 trucks from PACCAR. That would be the 3-to-1 ratio.
Right.
So they didn't buy a single more truck, but they bought 15,000 more trailers.
Yeah.
So the direction the industry is going is one where if I was a young, unencumbered person that wanted to drive truck, I could go buy a truck and no trailers, and I could run, whether it was LoadSmith, Amazon, Knight Swift, Hunt, USA Truck, Schneider. I could just run, their trailers all around the United States and never have to have the trailer. So that's the direction that things are going. And, we recognize that. And again, we just want to be a good partner to our carriers and to our drivers.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, you're right on the money. I actually heard a talk from a guy from JB Hunt. They're talking about their 360 solution, which is exactly what you're talking about right now. So pretty interesting stuff to hear you kind of say the same thing he was saying. How are you guys funding this project? Are you guys bootstrapped, or are you taking in money, or how are you guys doing it?
Yeah, so we've bootstrapped thus far, and not to say that we wouldn't look to doing a round of funding here. You know, that's a hard one, right? Like the time's not right,
Right.
And for lots of reasons. 18 months ago, we could have probably hit a home run with going out and finding a partner for capital. But it's not anything that's an immediate need for us. And so, we're, from our perspective, we'd rather grow a little bit slower, but a little bit more responsibly. But there will become a point in time where where we say, okay, the right partner, the right opportunity. What I think that you'll find, Rahmel, is that when we announce that we've partnered with somebody, I would imagine that what you're going to find is that maybe 30 days later, you're going to hear an acquisition announcement, meaning that our capital partner that we ultimately land on will be somebody who helps us from an acquisition in the future. So we don't necessarily need the money from an organic growth perspective, because we feel like we understand how to do that from a bootstrap perspective. But from a merger perspective or an acquisition perspective, I think that once you see us make an announcement, very shortly after, you're going to be like, I wonder who they're going to buy.
Right. Got you. With all the different freight networks out there, how are you guys standing out? I mean, is it like this kind of boutique feel that you guys have, like the specialized kind of freight, or what are you guys doing to stand out?
To be honest with you, we're probably the opposite of boutique or specialized.
Okay.
We're like the most like commoditized freight.
Gotcha.
What we're like, our customer that we're going after is going to be, the Cheerios of the world, right? Like General Mills. Like, our customer is like, we want it to be commoditized freight, palletized, on and off quickly, preload our trailer. Our driver only has to be on site for 15 minutes, drop it off at whatever their customer's customer is. If it does have to go to a grocery, warehouse for delivery, we don't want it to be, a product that is a 7-hour unload, as an example. So we definitely try to shy away from the specialized or the boutique stuff, and we try to focus in on stuff that is repetitive and efficient, and which is what all the major trucking companies go after. Right. Now, I will say that, one of our second largest customer is a very hard customer. And I don't mean hard to work with. I mean that, refrigerated protein is demanding from a pick and delivery perspective. Right. So we do a lot of hard. I'm not going to say that we don't do a lot of hard. But even when we do hard, we look for the right origin destination pairings, the right transit time, the right pickup and delivery, because we just know that if we select the wrong delivery time, as an example, we could be really hindering that driver from getting onto another load. And there's a cost associated with that. And look, we're going to pay the cost, because ultimately we're going to have to pay that driver more to haul our load for us, which will probably eat into our margins. And honestly, generally speaking, if we book a load incorrectly from an appointment time, we're probably going to lose money on that load. And so sometimes when we have, I get our loss report every day. Sometimes I'll just ask the question, well, how do we lose on this? Because we don't normally a bad appointment. Well, we recognize that we can't expect the driver to spend an extra 8 hours on our load for free. Right. And so there's a cost associated with that. So there's an element where we've got to be great at doing that. So we do hard freight. There's no question about it. But when we do it, we try to make it as easy and as efficient as possible.
Yeah, you do hard, but do hard easy.
Yep, exactly.
I love it. How long have you guys been around?
So we just had our 4th anniversary a couple months ago.
Okay.
And we officially shipped our first load on September 18th of 19. So we're getting close to our first anniversary of our first move that we did. But we've been, working on this for a little over 4 years now. It's gone by, I would say it's gone by really fast, except for the fact that I think that everybody can agree that there's like a 2-year period of our lives that are just missing.
For sure.
that happened to be like the 2 years of that 4. So
Yeah,
it does seem like a lot longer than 4, but only because I feel like there's 2 years missing. So
that's right.
but yeah, so 4 years, and we prior to that I spent 20 at my previous employment, and so I'm still a relatively young man, and have a lot of energy and excitement about what the future holds for not only for us but for drivers and for everybody in the freight world. I mean, it's what's crazy about to me, Rahmel, is that when I got into trucking, um, when the drivers left, we talked to them once a day from a payphone. It's like, and Transport Topics was the only media that existed.
Right.
And now I'm doing a podcast talking about trucking.
Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy. I mean, it's like really crazy what has happened in the last 25 years in this industry.
Yeah, for sure. How is like the recent volatility in the market and stuff impacted you guys, if at all?
Well, I mean, it's not been fun. I'll tell you that. We were fortunate enough in July of 2021 to recognize that the market had probably was coming to a rolling stop, if you will. And so we were really fortunate in July of 21 to recognize that. We spent the latter half of 21 and really the first half of 22 just solidifying all of our contracts with our customers. And so, like I said, we've benefited a lot from having 95% of our freight contractually committed. Now, as you go through this next RFP cycle, it will be interesting to see what happens, because I think that shippers recognize that we've passed the trough, so we're past the low side of the market. However, I think it's going to be a very slow, cumbersome out.
Yeah.
And so you may see some shippers that want to take advantage of a short term. They think they can save some money in the short term. I would say to that is that I have 2 customers in particular that I think attempted to do that. And this particular week, last week and this week, we've hauled more loads for them on the spot board than we've ever hauled for them. And so I'm cautious to any shipper in the RFP cycle right now that thinks that they can go after 35% rate reductions, because I just I've seen the RFP come and go, and then I've seen the result in the spot freight that we've been awarded thus far from those contracts. And so I worry that carriers are scrambling. They don't recognize that the trough has passed us, right? And look, the trough has passed us, but we're still below. Like, we're below the line of the dead. We're in the dead zone. Okay?
Yeah.
What I mean by the dead zone is you have shippers who think that rates are going to continue to go down, but you have carriers and drivers know that they're going up. And so you're in this bad zone where you may have shippers may think that we should be pushing things down, and the fact that they do reverse auctions is very difficult to navigate when you're in the dead zone right now. So the question is, do you book that load at that rate knowing that you're going to be underwater, or perhaps that it's already underwater? How do you navigate that, right? And so we're in a precarious point of inflection in the market right now, where shipper sentiment may be a little bit different than carrier sentiment. But I'll be honest with you, in in the fall of 2020, if you had asked me if I felt that the market could go any higher, I would have told you no. And and it did. And so I don't think the market can go much lower than what it is. I was wrong in the spring of 2020, or in the fall of 2020 rather, but I don't think I'm wrong now. I just think that the climb out's slow. And so for us, it hasn't impacted us. Yes, it's impacted us. It's impacted everybody. I think that, for my seat, if my customers were giving me 100% of what they awarded me, I would have more freight than I've ever had. The problem is that they just don't have the orders. And how do you, can you really be upset with them? Right. Meaning, that they want the orders. It's not like you don't talk to a company like Tyson Foods just announced yesterday that they're going to be closing 4 poultry plants between now and the end of the year. Well, they don't want to be doing that, right? Like, they would rather have the volume. They would rather have the need for those plants. They would rather be adding a third shift to those plants. And so you can't really fault your customer for not having the orders. But it does sting, right? Like when you think, oh, I'm going to get 100 loads a week from this customer and they're giving you 60. It's that the 40 aren't going anywhere else. You just know that they don't have the orders.
Yeah.
It's hard to navigate that. Now, the only one caveat to that is, and if there are any shippers listening, recognize that if you're awarded, if your award adherence isn't 100%, it really is hard when you start holding me to primary tender acceptance of 100 if the market's the other direction, right? But ultimately, that's the sword that we have to fall on, given our place in the industry as the customer, or as the vendor to these shippers. So, we recognize that we're always going to be held to 100% primary tender acceptance, and we recognize that they're never going to be held accountable to 100% award adherence. They're either going to under tender you or they're going to over tender you. It's never right, and it's just because they're forecasts. And usually when they do forecasts, they're using the previous year's numbers, which are probably skewed one way or the other.
Got it. I love it, man. Where can people connect with you, Brett, to learn more about LoadSmith and learn more about what you guys are working on over there?
They can email me, Brett at LoadSmith. That's Brett with 2 T's at loadsmith.com. If they go to our website, they can look around in there. If they click more information or info, all those emails come actually directly to me. So if you want more information about the company, I'm the one that gets those emails. They can go to our LinkedIn. They can go to my LinkedIn. But emailing me is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. Or you can just visit our website.
Got it. Any final thoughts you want to kind of put out there before we wrap?
No, I just really appreciate you having me on the show. The wonderful thing about this business is all of the people that you get to meet. And from my perspective, I've been so fortunate in my career to have met so many great people, so many great drivers, so many great customers, so many great people that work, whether you're talking about working at trailer manufacturers, truck stops, it doesn't, insurance people. You wouldn't think that I like insurance people, but we have great partnerships with insurance people. And so I just really love this industry because of the down to earthness that exists in it. I wish that the margins were better.
Right.
That's the one thing about this industry that I just wish was different, was the margins. But the people just make it so much better. And so, I just can't thank you enough for having me on. And your audience is a diverse audience that does pretty much every aspect of the job. Driving, maintaining, working inside, all of those things. And so, I just appreciate all of the work that your audience does, because, some of the work that we do is hard. I think back to my days working in asset-based trucking, and the shop in Phoenix, and the record heat that Phoenix has had this summer, and yet those shop people are there every day making sure that the equipment is in good working condition, that it's safe, that it's reliable. Those people get overlooked, right? Like it's a weird thing, but almost everybody in our industry gets overlooked. And so we can't thank enough people enough, right? Like it's not just drivers, it's everybody, and all of the jobs are hard. Like none of the jobs are easy in this business.
You're 100%. You're right, man. You're right. Like they say, you're only as good as your last load, man. In this industry, it's a very thankless career. But
Yep.
for those who are in it, we are very special people, and we definitely are hard workers. So I mirror that sentiment, man. We appreciate you guys out there for sure.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Well, hey.
Brett, I appreciate this talk, man. Very, very insightful. Look forward to working with you in the future. Any ways that Truck and Hustle can help you guys, please reach out and let us know. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us. This will be live on YouTube as well if you want to catch the replay. Thank you, Brett. I appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck with LoadSmith in the future, man.
Thank you, sir, Rahmel. Really appreciate the time today.
All right. Take care. All right, guys, we're going to wrap for today. This is today's episode of The Shift. Tune in next week. We'll have another amazing episode. See you guys later.